Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Asian Chronicle. Today, we're joined by Mr. Paul Antonopoulos, a leading geopolitical analyst and a journalist known for his powerful insights on international affairs and foreign policy. Paul holds a master's in international relations from Western Sydney University, and he is an editor at Greek City Times. He's also the project director at the Center for Syncretic Studies, where his work focuses on shifting power dynamics in the Middle East, North Africa, and Latin America. We're excited to have him with us here today. Welcome, Paul.
Well, thank you once to meet you, and thank you for having me on. So I know that the Asian Chronicle is just a few months into the making, so I'm very happy to make my own contribution to the Asian Chronicle.
Thank you so much. So today's theme for our interview is civilizations, conflict, and the changing world order. And I'll dive right into my first question for you, which is, the Cyprus issue. The Cyprus issue remains a persistent source of tension between Greece and Turkey. This reflects deeper disputes over maritime boundaries, sovereignty, and strategic control. Recent diplomatic efforts have not resolved the division of the island since Turkey's 1974 intervention. So, Paul, how do you see the significance of Cyprus in the Greece-Turkey rivalry? Do you think it has evolved from a long-standing stalemate into a permanent fault line in the Eastern Mediterranean?
Well, absolutely. So if you'll allow me, though, I'll a little bit deeper into history rather than beginning in 1974, because if we look at the issue between Greece and Turkey, it really is rooted in history. So I won't delve too long into history, but I'll just provide some background into how we arrived with the Cyprus issue and the Turkish invasion in 1974 and the repercussions that on the world today, or at least the East Mediterranean region today. When we look at Greece's geopolitics, it's all considered, the tensions and rivalry with Turkey are always considered. And these are tensions and rivalry that has continued unabated since Greece achieved its independence from the Ottoman Empire 200 years ago. When Greece achieved independence in 1932, only a small portion of the size of Greece. So the current borders of Greece result from Greek victories in a series of wars, mostly with the Ottoman Empire, which finally collapsed in 1922 and was succeeded by the Republic of Turkey, led by the secularist Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. What I'd like to point out, though, is that although Ataturk was a secularist, he was also an ultra-nationalist, and he was partially responsible for the extermination of 3 million Christians, mostly Greeks, Armenians, and Assyrians between 1914 and 1923. And what he wanted was to implement a policy of a Turkey for the Turks, which in those times meant to be an Ottoman Muslim, even if he himself was a bisexual who enjoyed drinking alcohol. Might I say, not all too different from Ali Jinnah in Pakistan. So, although many believe that the current belligerence of Turkey is due to President Tayyip Erdogan, Turkey has always been has always had expansionist ambitions, whether it was the secular Kemalists, nationalists that were in power, or whether it's the Islamists that are in power, as is the current situation with Erdogan. It's important to highlight that it was Turk who started the process of annexing the Hatay region from Syria, which was achieved only 1 year after he died in 1939. To this day, Syria still does not recognize Turkish sovereignty over Hatay province. At the same time, it was the Kemalists, those belonging to the secular ultranationalist ideology of Ataturk, who invaded Cyprus in 1974. And I will delve into that issue a little bit more deeply, absolutely. But the main point that I'm trying to highlight is that Greece's geopolitics is always considers Turkey. Turkey being previously, currently, and in the future will continue being a revisionist power, wanting to revive the Ottoman Empire. And Greece too was an expansionist power for most of its post-independence history, but with the intention of liberating historically Greek lands that fell outside of the borders of Greece. This ambition, however, came to an end in 1974 when Turkey invaded northern Cyprus in response to Greece's maneuvers to try and unite with Cyprus, which only a decade before the invasion had actually been a British colony. So Cyprus was for a long period part of the Greek world. It was for many, many centuries a part of the Ottoman world. And it was even for a short period a British colony, which we often forget about. It's actually a part of the Commonwealth, just as India is. So since Greece's failed ambitions to try and unite with Cyprus, and with Turkey having invaded the northern portion, which is unrecognized as an independent state, northern Cyprus I'm talking about, only recognized by Ankara. Since then, Greece has completely abandoned ideas and became very Western focused and orientated, becoming a European Union member in 1981. In effect, Greece has been a state of deep inertia towards the east, only concerning itself with Turkey, nothing really more beyond that. So that's previously. However, when we look at today, Greece has rapidly changed since the New Democracy Party was elected in 2019, and the foreign ministry came under Nikos Dendias. Under Dendias, Greece has opened up new embassies in Africa, in India, reopened the embassy in Syria, fostered deep and strategic ties with Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and with India. And we will discuss these synergies later in the discussion, but allow me to say that Greece now pursues its geopolitical interests with much more confidence than in any other time in the 21st century, and one with a strategic and civilizational role, with Cyprus at its very center as well. Whenever we discuss the geopolitics of Greece and Cyprus, it becomes inseparable, even though they're two different states. And when we look at it from a civilizational perspective, Greece gave Egypt, Libya their names, the two North African countries. Greek colonies were founded there thousands of years ago. Greece also gave Syria its name, as well as Asia, which was used to describe the region of Anatolia, or today's Turkey. So for too long, modern Greece treated North Africa, the Middle East, and even India as far-off regions rather than places to which we have deep historical, cultural, religious, and genetic connections with. And as Greece is expanding out, it's also including Cyprus into all of these synergies. So when we're closely coordinating with India, for example, we often include Cyprus. And the reason is that Greece and India have a lot of commonalities and security concerns to look about. And we'll discuss this much later on too, in relation with India, Pakistan and the Kashmir issue, and Cyprus and the issue with Turkey. So there's a lot of coordinating happening right now between Greece, Cyprus and Turkey. And it's hitting a major fault line considering the events that have been going on in Israel, in Gaza, and it's put Cyprus at a very strategic advantage for an island not too far from these conflict zones. And for Turkey, they view Cyprus as almost being like a dagger in its underbelly, even just looking at it from a very geographic perspective when looking at the location of Cyprus, just at the very southern coastline of Turkey. So for Turkey, Cyprus is a huge security issue, even though they are the dominant military power on the island. And this has, as in Israel begin separating from each other, they used to have very close economic relations. As they begin to separate over the Gaza issue, you can see that the relations with Israel and Cyprus are becoming much, much more closer, more than any other time in history. And this is supported by the Americans too. So there's been a huge shift in the situation in the Mediterranean, spurred on because of the Hamas attack against October 2023. And and it has lessened the importance that Turkey has to the USA and to Israel, and increased the importance of Cyprus. So I think, although the Cyprus issue has not been resolved after 50 years, I think we're heading in a direction where there's more and more global outrage over this, particularly with Israel and the USA now having strategic interests in Cyprus. For the previous decades, they never had, as they always favored Turkey.
Yes, I think we really are understanding how Cyprus issue is evolving due to other external factors, not just the relationship between Greece and Turkey. And with this, I do want to come to Turkey a lot more now. Shifting towards Turkey, Turkey's increasingly assertive foreign policy under Erdogan has deepened mistrust and raised regional stakes. I mean, you already mentioned it, but just to pick your brain a little bit more on this, beyond Cyprus, what are all the other factors that are fueling a broader just Greece and Turkey tension today? Additionally, do you think there is room for any more meaningful diplomacy, or if we have hit a permanent state of conflict?
The simple answer is, I would say we're in a permanent state of conflict. The reason I say this is that, as mentioned before, these irredentist ambitions long predate Erdogan, actually, as seen in Hatay province in the 1930s and what happened with Cyprus in the 1970s. But what has changed under him, I would say, is the utilization of Islam towards his goals. So the Kemalists, the ideologues of Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, they're ultra-nationalists, mostly do not support, as an example, the conversion of Hagia Sophia Cathedral into a mosque. They drink alcohol, they abhor the hijab, etc., etc. But what I would say is one of the most contentious issues between Greece and Turkey today is Turkey's so-called blue homeland doctrine. Turkish claims over Greece's maritime space, which was actually concocted by Cihat Igaici. He's a Kemalist, a secular, and he's a former Rear Admiral of the Turkish Navy. And he's now a professor and president at the University's Maritime and Global Strategies Center. Erdogan, despite being in violation of despite the blue homeland theory being in violation of international law, Erdogan fully embraces it and fully pursues it, despite the doctrine being theorized by a domestic ideological foe, a non-Islamist, a secularist. He's the one who came up with that. But moving away from just between Greece and Turkey, though, the point that I'm trying to say is that Turkey under Erdogan has become far more brazen, as seen by Turkey's interventions in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, and in Nagorno-Karabakh, where Armenia and Azerbaijan had a war a few years ago over this region. In what would have been unimaginable under a Kemalist government, Erdogan turned Turkey into a global jihadist staging point, where Turkey trained and funded and armed many, many jihadists before they went and joined ISIS or some Al-Qaeda affiliated groups in Iraq and Syria, with most famously al-Jolani marching on Damascus in December and taking over the majority of Syria. What a huge victory in Turkish power projection, because the axis of resistance has completely collapsed. Syria no longer serves as a conduit point between weapons rounds between Iran and Hezbollah. Iranian and Russian influence in Syria has evaporated, and Turkey now controls the country's military, intelligence services, its foreign ministry, and many, many other departments and ministries within the country. So Turkey invested a lot of resources towards the Syria project, and it appears that it has been a great success, unfortunately. Syria is now divided between a Turkish-controlled zone, an Israeli-controlled zone, and an American-controlled zone. So this would make one think that perhaps Turkey and Israel are on an inevitable path towards conflict. But in my estimations, I think this is very unlikely. And the reason I say that is because despite all the bombastic rhetoric from Erdogan, such as claiming Jerusalem is a Turkish city and Jerusalem will one day return to the Turkish world, etc. Turkey actually does not have the capacity to defeat Israel in a conflict, out with American support for Israel, which is a given, despite Turkey also being a NATO member. So for all the interventions of Turkey, and there have been many of them, as I mentioned, Iraq, Syria, Libya, Nagorno-Karabakh, each one of these interventions has always been against a significantly weaker opponent, such as Armenia during the Nagorno-Karabakh war, or even against war-torn countries such as Syria and Libya. Turkey has never majorly escalated against countries with capable militaries, such as Greece and such as Israel. It cannot be forgotten that despite all the threats against Israel, especially at the Gaza war, 40% of Israel's oil came from Erdogan via Turkey. So instead of turning off the taps, Erdogan actually allowed energy to continually flow abundantly from Turkey's Ceyhan port directly to Israel. I believe that Erdogan understands that there is limits to his ambitions, particularly those against Greece and Israel. But what he is doing is indoctrinating future generations towards these goals, including Imam Hatip schools, which are effectively madrasas, and other methods such as through TV series, Turkish-produced television series, such as Ertugrul. And these television series are very, very popular in many parts of the Islamic world, including or especially in Pakistan. So these series fill Turkish youth with nationalistic and Islamic fervor and want to put them on the path of future conquest. So it was this reason why the downfall of Assad's Syria and the installation of controlled puppets such as Ghani was pivotal for Erdogan. As in his mind, although he cannot wage war for Jerusalem at this moment in time, and probably not within his lifetime, it is his hope that future generations of Turks will be that future generations of Turks will bring the war to Israel and will attempt to conquer Israel and Jerusalem. So in this way, we see that even beyond Greece, through his neo ideology, Erdogan is definitely working towards the goal of recreating the Ottoman.
Erdogan is using and mobilizing all existing institutions and resources to almost start a psychological influence, towards his population, trying to create this mindset, which I think exists in a lot of communities, but also now making the expansionist policies even more obvious through his campaigns, through, like you said, media, etc. So coming to very specifically on Syria, Turkey has been successful in increasing its presence. Do you think it's part of a larger strategy? I mean, it is obvious, but it's part of a larger strategy to shape the region in Turkey's image, bring back that pride of Ottoman Empire, or what we call neo-Ottomanism now. So how do you think it will turn out for the stability in the region and the balance of power? Because you already mentioned how the America, with America's support with Israel, the developments, how important now Cyprus has become, and how Turkey is still not capable to actually come and take over Jerusalem. But how do you think this will all turn out in Turkey's favor in the long term, maybe?
So I think Erdogan has been aligning certain countries that share his vision, and the most obvious one I would say is the Turkey-Pakistan nexus, and he hopes that through such formations that he will be able to mount a bloc and challenge Israel and its allies, Pakistan obviously being a nuclear power and Turkey having the ambitions to becoming a nuclear power, and Azerbaijan fully aligning with Turkey's foreign policy too, almost identically. So I would say it's through formations such as this, as well as what you mentioned, a lot of his soft power approach, whether it's through humanitarian efforts, whether it's through television series, whether it's through madrasas, whatever it may be. Erdogan is his world vision to the Islamic world. I would say, though, it hasn't had a lot of success, though. The Iranians have their own vision, the Arabs have their own vision, and etc., etc. However, Pakistan has fully aligned with these ambitions. And I would say I attribute this to not only Erdogan's neo-Ottoman ideology, but also his pan-Turkic ideology. So just allow me to elaborate that on a little bit. The Turkey-Pakistan-Azerbaijan nexus, they hold regular military exercises, some of them even named quote-unquote three brothers. And each of these states, all three of these states, have announced their support for their respective ambitions in Kashmir, Cyprus, and against Armenia. And their ambitions are very, very integrated and quite deep. They've been existing for well over a decade now, and they've been working very, very hard towards this. So although Erdogan, as I mentioned, does have his neo-Ottoman ambitions to recreate the Ottoman Empire, he has also adopted pan-Turkism to his ideology. So he also believes in a greater pan-Turkic state, which far exceeds the borders of the former Ottoman Empire and stretches all the way to Western China and Northwest India. And for this reason, Pakistan is considered a so-called quote-unquote brother due to the false claim that Pakistanis are descended from Turkic Mughals, rather than Pakistanis overwhelmingly being descended of Indians who were converted to Islam, whether by force or for practical reasons, irregardless of the reasons. So Turkey, just like Pakistan, I would say, has such an identity crisis, with most so-called Turks themselves being descended of Greeks, Armenians, and other Anatolian people who were Turkified and Islamified. I include Erdogan himself, who admits to being a Georgian Muslim, who are otherwise known as Laz, or Mustafa Kemal Ataturk, who himself was actually of Jewish origins. And even the most recently imprisoned opposition leader in Turkey, Ekrem İmamoğlu, he is actually of Greek origins. So it's in my contention that due to the trauma of being descended of those who were forced to become Muslim rather than the all-conquering Turkic warlords, Pakistanis and Turkish citizens overcompensate for their identity crisis, which is why they attach their identities to the conquerors rather than those who were conquered. Unfortunately, this means that Greece is doomed to neighbor a country with a permanent fixation of the Ottoman Empire and recreating it. Not just Greece, though, as well as Syria, as well as Iraq, as well as Armenia, as well as Cyprus. And we see that India too must also contend with Pakistanis wanting to recreate, in a sense, the Mughal Empire. So now we see how Turkey has successfully mobilized Pakistani support on the Cyprus issue, while Erdogan himself has positioned himself as a champion for Pakistan's Kashmir cause. So I would say that despite Erdogan's grand ambitions, he's only really found success with Azerbaijan and Pakistan, and perhaps to a lesser extent a few countries in Africa. The most obvious example being Somalia. So he's very, very limited in his outreach. He has not successfully mobilized all the Arabs towards his cause, although he does have Arab proxies that act on his behalf, such as Hamas and certain other Muslim Brotherhood groups. Nonetheless, despite Erdogan's limited influence in the Islamic world, it still causes utter chaos for every country that must contend with Turkey and the ambitions of its allies. I already mentioned Pakistan. And for this reason, I don't have much prospect that there will be in the future, because, as I already explained, this is well beyond Erdogan, and rather it's the state policies of Turkey to continuously be expansionist.
Yes. Of course, completely resonate with your point on this well beyond expands not just within Turkey, within Middle East, but the old Ottoman Empire. Now, you mentioned Pakistan. I would like to come to, this, you had written an article in Swaraj titled A Coalition of Civilizations, Why It Is Time for India to Unite with Nations, threatened by Pakistan and Turkey. Now, we see an informal axis appearing, Greece, India, Armenia on one side, Turkey, Pakistan, and Azerbaijan on one side. So my question to you is, do you think that this is the start of a broader geopolitical alignment, or maybe, something that can evolve into formal cooperation? What is your vision for a coalition of civilizations? How do you think it could materialize practically? Yes.
A coalition of civilizations is absolutely necessary, but unfortunately at this stage, it is just a pipe dream for now, particularly after Turkey's successes in Syria. Syria is a very historically rich country. They have a very beautiful culture, but it's been completely overtaken by Muslim Brotherhood ideologues and radicals. Common values and security threats should foster closer ties between many ancient countries. I mentioned Syria, you mentioned Armenia as well, and I would also include Egypt. However, the main difficulties in achieving such a coalition are internal factors. So, for example, in Egypt, who is to say that President El-Sisi, who currently rules in Egypt, might not be overthrown? He might be overthrown, and he could very easily be replaced with a Turkey-friendly Muslim Brotherhood president, as Morsi was before Sisi came to power. So unfortunately, I don't have so many good prospects for the immediate future. And unfortunately, there is not much synergy between Greece, India, and Armenia at this moment in time, especially when compared to the Turkey, Pakistan, Azerbaijan nexus. Although the bilateral ties between Armenia and Greece and Armenia and India have been growing, Armenia has been in a state of inertia and political crisis since losing Nagorno-Karabakh to Azerbaijan. And such ties have not been expanding rapidly enough, let alone at a trilateral level. What I would say is that although modern Greek-Indian relations have been neglected since both countries, particularly after India achieved independence, in the last few years there has been a huge advancements, which are very, very natural considering our deep historical connection. This is why in a very short period of time, immense trust has been built in Greek and Indian ties bilaterally. Greece places a lot of value on India at all levels, from the military to the economy to culture and education. But there is no mistaking the main point driving our rapidly expanding ties is the common threats that we face, Turkey and Pakistan. When we look at things occurring at a more broader level, trilaterally or multilaterally, there's only movements occurring between Greece, Cyprus, and India. And unfortunately, there hasn't been much going on in other trilateral or multilateral formations. Just a few days ago in Greece, however, we completed military exercises in Neokos exercises, and that had the participation of about 15 different countries, including India, that were hosted in Greece. There were Air Force exercises. So in this way, we are seeing that there are military exercises going on a multilateral formation, but at a more deep and strategic level, it remains very, very superficial. So this is something that definitely needs to be worked on, because we can see the threat that the nexus of Turkey, Pakistan, and Azerbaijan poses. Since Azerbaijan took the Nagorno-Karabakh region from the Armenians, we've already seen entire villages being destroyed. We've seen cemeteries razed. We've seen churches dismantled. There's complete removal of any Armenian identity, cultural references, religion, and etc., being completely removed. And we see this happen in Pakistan time to time when they'll go and destroy a temple or something like this. So this is why we need to really coordinate at a much broader level rather than just bilaterally, because we're not just talking about peoples and territories, but we're also talking about culture and history that are also being destroyed by these forces. So it's something that unfortunately isn't moving ahead in the way that it should, but it really needs to.
So what I take away from you is that not just bilateral, but we need more multilateral cooperation, for a coalition of civilizations to really materialize, be meaningful, and create some kind of, increase our way of, just defending ourselves, right? I mean, these are forces which are aggressive, and we are the ones who have to sort of protect our culture, defend ourselves. So, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about this alignment that is happening. However, we do see the growing partnership of Greece and India. Yes. Do you think that beyond civilization, currently in times of modern diplomacy, there are new ways for both these nations to collaborate, especially in defense and beyond? What role do you see this relationship playing out in a deeper, longer-term partnership? Do you think?
So Greece has positioned itself as India's gateway to Europe, particularly on the emerging India, Middle East, Europe corridor, IMEC. And IMEC will help Greece diversify, as one example, away from China's Belt and Road Initiative. And we can delve into that a little bit later on too, perhaps. While also deepening synergy between Greece and India, it's being fully supported by decision makers here in Greece. So for Greece to be India's entrance into Europe. Although Italy and France are also positioning themselves to be India's gateway to Europe, all indications suggest that it will be in Greece, or Greece will be the gateway. And this is largely thanks to the greatest developments that have occurred in only a short few years between Greece and India. Both Jaishankar, Indian Foreign Minister Mr. Jaishankar, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi have visited Athens in the last few years, and Greek foreign ministers and the Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis have also visited New Delhi in recent years. So this synergy between Greece and India, it began in about 2020, despite all the chaos that COVID was causing throughout the whole world. This is where I can pinpoint where modern Greek and Indian relations really started to emerge. And the reason for that, I would say, is it was both of India's initiative of wanting to expand and export its products towards Europe, and Greece is obviously a very reliable partner for India in this regard, or hopes to be. And Greece also wanting to expand away from its Western-centric foreign policy outlook. So just to give you a little bit of context, today Greece is emerging from the 2010s economic crisis, where unemployment reached an eye-watering 28%, but Greece has an above EU average growth rate, with very exciting economic prospects for the future as well. And a large part of that has been achieved by emphasizing the importance of Greece's positioning at the crossroads between Europe, Asia, and Africa. When Greece faced crippling austerity imposed by Germany, the European Union, and Western financial institutions such as the IMF, there was a quick realization that Greece needed to break out of its narrow Western-focused worldview. And as part of Greece's new outward trajectory, soft power has been a huge part, whether it be through utilizing Greece's ancient history, such as the case in building ties with India, or with Greek Orthodox communities that exist in the Middle East, such as in Syria, who are remnants of the medieval Greek-speaking and cultured Eastern Roman Empire, more commonly known as the Byzantine Empire. And with this quick realization that Greece was abandoned during the economic crisis, Greece began looking more eastwards again. And this is where China was able to get a huge majority share in the port of Piraeus, and we'll delve into that a little bit more deeply later on. But it also meant Greece identifying India as very, very important to its own economic prosperity, as well as its security interests. There are just far too many reasons for the Greek-Indian relationship to not be a success. I've gone over a little bit on the military aspect. We share security concerns. We are coordinating on the Cyprus and the Kashmir issues. Our intelligence agencies are also cooperating very closely. But even beyond that, we've had many, many delegations from India and Greece visit their respective countries. And we've seen Greek companies open up in India, one of them being Coffee Island, the first European coffee chain to open up in India. And some other services and some other companies, Greek companies, have opened up in India. And vice versa, Indian companies are also investing in Greece, such as in airports and other infrastructure projects. So we got the military aspect, we got the intelligence aspects, we got the economic aspects. But even in education, we've had universities partnering up with each other to host conferences related to Greece and India, such as one in JNU, and we've also held a conference at the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki in northern Greece. So even at the academic and educational levels, there are huge exchanges going on right now as well. Then in the scientific field, we're talking about perhaps sending satellites to space together and other such ventures. These are in the very, very preliminary stages though. But I'm trying to point out that it's very multifaceted. So it's not just based on security or economics, but it's in every level. Culture, even in culture as well. We've had huge cultural exchanges. Greek artifacts have visited Indian museums, and we're hoping to receive Indian artifacts in Greek museums and whatnot. So we're not just looking at this from a very, very cynical level of my enemy's enemy is my friend. That's a huge part to play, undoubtedly, and perhaps the most important, but it's not the only. And I think this is very, very important in building people-to-people ties. Even today, you've allowed me the opportunity to speak to your audience, to give my perspective. And this just allows broader understanding. So this is why out of all of Greece's relationship building it's been engaging in the last 5 or 6 years under the new government, whether it be in Africa or Latin America or the Middle East or whatever. The most exciting prospect is a relationship between Greece and India. It's just too multifaceted.
Thank you, Paul. I think, yes, the ties go a lot deeper. Our traditions, our philosophies, a lot of commonalities between the Greek and the Indian people. Shifting the discussion a little bit to the relationship between Greece and EU. Greece's relationship with EU has been shaped by various factors, economics, sovereignty, and also a rising nationalism is to be seen. So how do you think Greek nationalism is evolving with the EU framework in light of evolving tensions? We see the Russia-Ukraine war, and also the US, almost cutting a deal with Russia, threatening to reduce its troops in the EU. You see US sort of reducing its support. We also see reducing its support with the EU, NATO, and we are trying to see how this will evolve with respect to Israel as well. So, this whole triangle that is forming, how do you see in this context Greece becoming, what will Greece's foreign policy look like? Will it still be more tied to close to Brussels, or will it be, more east looking? What would it look like?
I'll deal with the Ukraine issue first, considering this is the most important issue on the European continent at the moment.
Yes.
I would say that allowing the war in Ukraine to drag on for as long as it has been a catastrophe. We cannot forget that Russia and Ukraine almost reached a deal in Istanbul only 1 or 2 months after the Russian invasion began. But they were gazumped by the now former British Prime Minister Boris Johnson and other Western leaders. So since then, hundreds of thousands of people have died. Ukraine has lost more territory and its economy and industry is completely destroyed. It's a shambles. Meanwhile, Russia's economy has completely survived. And I would say in actual fact, it's actually thriving rather than just surviving, especially compared to European countries like Germany, whose industry is slowing down with factories, including the famous Volkswagen. VW factories are being taken over by China, or there are discussions for China to take these factories over, and they're being very, very seriously considered in Berlin. So although sanctions have boomeranged on Europe rather than affecting Russia, it appears that Europe has remained very committed to their reckless policy of supporting Ukraine to the quote-unquote the very end, even if Trump is withdrawing the US from this quagmire. So, however, Europe does not have the power or capabilities to support Ukraine until Russia is defeated. Russia won't be defeated in this war, short of a direct intervention from the USA or several European powers. This simply won't happen. So Europe's policy on Ukraine is guided by ideology rather than realism, or else there would have been an acknowledgement that Ukraine had no chance of winning the war after the failed summer offensive in 2023. However, Europe's division is becoming increasingly evident, with many countries, particularly in Southern Europe, Italy and Spain are the main ones, blasting the EU's High Representative for Foreign Policy, Kaja Kallas, for suggesting 40 billion euros to be invested into Ukraine's war effort. This is money that Europe doesn't have at the moment. Whether you support Russia or not is irrelevant, since realism dictates that Ukraine cannot regain the territory it has lost. But Europe continues its reckless sanctions policy to its own detriment. Trump would certainly be frustrated that Europe is not contributing to the peace process, but I doubt this will be the main reason the US president is frustrated with the EU. Rather, I think Trump will turn his attention in trying to push Europe away from China, which will prove to be a very, very difficult task. So where does Greece fit into this quagmire? Well, actually, Greece is positioning itself to not just be Western focused as it used to be, but not entirely pivoting towards the East either. Rather, Greece is beginning to embrace itself as being a Eurasian power, as we historically have always been. Of course, Greece today, the territory of Greece, or the Republic of the Hellenic Republic, is entirely within the bounds of Europe, but historically and culturally, we span the African continent, or specifically North Africa. We span today's Turkey and the Middle East, and then obviously within the borders of Greece today. And we're beginning to acknowledge that this is who we are. We're on a crossroads of multiple continents. And as I already mentioned, thanks to IMEC, Greece will consolidate its position as a crossover between multiple continents even more so. And this requires us to fully engage with the East, which we had not been doing for many, many decades. So I mentioned we reopened the embassy in Syria long before the current takeover by the radical forces. However, we're also engaging with the radical forces. Unlike Europe, who were quickly willing to congratulate Giuliani, Greece has very specific reasons for needing to engage Syria. It's not out of some false belief that a regime was replaced. I mean, a political regime was replaced, but it's been replaced with a theocratic regime now. So arguably much worse than what it was under Assad. However, we share a neighborhood, being the East Mediterranean. A lot of illegal immigrants arrive from Syria into Greece, and there's a large Greek Orthodox community, which I had mentioned, are remnants of the Greek-speaking Byzantine Empire, and they're very connected to us. So we cannot afford to be separated from events in Syria, and we're fully engaging in them. More recently, we've even offered to train the military of Lebanon and arm them following the effective decapitation of Hezbollah by Israel. So we're engaging far more with the East now, and Europe is beginning to wake up to the fact that we can't treat the Near East as from the Western perspective, the Near East. We cannot consider the Near East as a far off location. We need to be engaged. However, because Europe is very in its ideology and not being flexible, it does cut off Europe from being able to engage with other regions. And the most obvious is, as I already explained, that being with Russia. I mean, Europe's economic destiny will always be attached to Russia, just as Russia's will also be attached to Europe. This realization hasn't set in Europe, though. But in the Greek context, we realize that we do start slowly winding down this Ukraine war, because we can't have, from Greece's perspective, we can't have conflict in Eastern Europe while also contending with the issues of Turkey. One of the biggest frustrations from the Greek perspective regarding the European Union is this belief that to counter Russia, Europe needs to become closer to Turkey. So we've even seen a lot of debates in Europe going on right now of a pan-European defense system. And this is, as you also mentioned, that Trump has his own agenda towards Russia, and that's to start withdrawing and beginning to lose interest in events in Europe. And Europe is slowly beginning to realize that NATO, or the US-led NATO, cannot be relied upon, and the continent must take charge of Europe, especially Germany, took for granted that the USA would be their security guarantors. Now, Trump has a very different vision and doesn't want to be wasting American taxpayers' dollars on European defense. And Europe views Russia as its biggest threat and believes that Turkey can act as a counterbalance. So Greece and Cyprus, as European Union members, are having a lot of debates and contentions with other European Union countries about including Turkey into European defense. So this is another fault line that exists within the European Union, among many other divisions, which I won't get myself into. But again, this is where we see that Europe doesn't have a unified foreign policy towards any sort of issue. Although Greece and Cyprus view Turkey as an existential threat that must be contended with, too many in Europe don't view Turkey in this way. And Turkey has been balancing its relations with Russia and the West quite well, actually, which is why it's able to gain concessions from Russia, which is why Russia is building a nuclear power plant in Turkey, for example, but also why the European, or why many within the European Union want to include in any sort of pan-European defense structures, which are, of course, aimed against Russia.
So that, I think, yes, we do realize that the way the world looks at Turkey is very different from the way, say, Greece or Azerbaijan would obviously look at Turkey. They have done a good job of balancing this, this line that they have to walk on. But, when discussing this, we also need to look at China. So I really want to pivot this discussion a little bit towards China and China's projects that are, the China's Belt and Road initiatives, its other developmental projects. So China's control over the port, the Paris port, through its BRI, has drawn global attention. It has brought in investment. It is good for the economy, but also, it leads to the question: is this entry into Greece a strategic gain? It is a strategic gain, especially, we also spoke of IMAC. How is this deal viewed now, especially amid growing pushback against China's expansionism, but also when China is being looked at as a more stable partner compared to the US?
So China obtained a majority share in the port of Piraeus during the worst years of Greece's economic crisis. And when the West, as I mentioned, including the Western financial institutions such as the IMF and all that, had either abandoned Greece, abandoned investments in Greece, or imposed very, very harsh austerity measures. So the port of Piraeus was effectively left just to go into bankruptcy and ruin. Meanwhile, China has helped turn the port of Piraeus into the fifth busiest port in Europe and the second busiest in the Mediterranean. So it effectively saved the port of Piraeus, we can say. However, frustrations are really beginning to grow in Greece. Only earlier this month, a few weeks ago, perhaps 2 weeks ago, the Greek shipping ministry complained that China failed on their promise to improve the facilities of the port, such as water systems, Wi-Fi, enhanced security systems, new passenger terminals, etc., etc. According to the ministry, the situation during the summer months, tourism, when tourists are at the most numerous in Greece, is outrageous, the ministry said. So thousands of tourists and truck drivers and everybody else who has to use the port facilities, they're forced to wait for hours in some instances in very unsanitary conditions without adequate shelter or basic services, etc., etc. So there's a lot of frustration in Greece right now that although China has turned Piraeus port into a very, very busy port, the infrastructure is abysmal right now. And more alarmingly, there seems to be no indications that Costco, the Chinese company holding the port of Piraeus, there's no immediate plans of them making the upgrades that are desperately needed, especially as the port becomes busier and busier. Not just the commercial side of the port, but the side of the port that services the islands, particularly in the summer months for tourists. So nonetheless, Greece is attempting to diversify away from China, and we mentioned IMF already. And it is also why India is being encouraged, heavily encouraged by Greece to invest in a Greek port. So discussions are ongoing, but it's believed that the Adani Group has an interest in a Greek port, one in northern Greece. We don't know which one for sure yet, but it could perhaps be Thessaloniki, which is Greece's second city. So this is the main Chinese holding over Greece, the port of Piraeus. Other than that, they don't have control of any other major infrastructure like they've achieved in other parts of the world, particularly Africa. However, the frustrations are growing. There's no indication that the improvements needed will be made. And I think effectively China is being locked out of Greece or from investing in Greece. Greece has managed to attract a lot of investments from India, which will expand, but not only, also the United Arab Emirates, for example, Israel, the USA. So now that Greece is recovering, and mind you, the Greece's path towards economic recovery has been quite impressive in such a short period of time. The Chinese have been locked out, I believe.
Wow, that is that is good news for us. So always great to have more cooperation between Greece and India. And so this brings me to just understanding how geopolitics and narratives, you having been a career journalist, in the shifting world order, the control over narratives has become as important as control over territory. So in this context, the role of mainstream media is dominated, in a way, it's almost like West versus alternative media outlets. And how do you see the role of information warfare in shaping public perception, public opinion, and then foreign policy? What roles do independent journalism play in this battle?
Well, it's because of platforms such as the Asian Chronicle that we can hear a diverse range of perspectives from all over the world. This helps broaden understandings across different countries and cultural zones and serves the purpose of narrowing gaps that can exist between peoples. And for this, you and the Asian Chronicle must be lauded for the great work. But there's undoubtedly a big information war going on right now. So whether it be against the USA, whether it be against China or Israel, even India is not immune from this. So we often see in the New York Times, for example, there's often hit pieces against Prime Minister Narendra Modi as one example. So I think in the information war, there's no allies, there's none of this. Everyone is serving their own self-interest. And this is very, very dangerous because when we look at the Greece and India context, we're dealing with neighboring countries that are highly Islamified, highly aggressive, and they're susceptible to influence from Al Jazeera, for example. And Al Jazeera is funded by Qatar, and Qatar is also the main funder and backer of the Muslim Brotherhood ideology. And we know the Muslim Brotherhood ideology is deadly. We saw what Hamas did to Israel in October 2023. And a lot of this is, a lot of this radicalization is not just reduced to madrasas and societies and the mosques, but also because of the information war. So many jihadists were enticed to go and fight in Syria, even though they may have come from Western China or Sub-Saharan Africa or somewhere like there. So it's very, very critical that we don't just ignore these reports, but that we engage with them, we counter them, and we project the truth. Because if we just allow it to run wild, unfortunately, it sets a very, very dangerous precedence, a very, very dangerous precedence. So it's exactly like, as I said, why the Asian Chronicle and yourself must be absolutely lauded for the great work, because unfortunately, we are engaged in this information war, and it does lead to radicalization, which leads to security threats against our respective countries.
Right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. It's been great having you with us. And you were open to discussing such wide-ranging conversation. Your insights offer not just analysis, but a vision also into the past, because you set your context, start from where all of it began, to our present, to what, how we can navigate this uncertain future. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for more such conversations and analysis at the Asian Chronicle.